One of the experiences I trust every homebrewer shares is the feeling of awe that comes from witnessing the conversion of wort into beer through the fermentation process. Even after 15 years, I still get giddy when I see the first signs of airlock activity, a nice fluffy krausen developing on top of my beer. The worst is when this takes too long. You all know the anxiety that comes from checking on a batch a day after pitching and seeing no action. This is why we love Imperial Yeast, who pack 200 billion cells of the purest yeast into each pitch-right pouch, which assures quick starts, healthy fermentation, and predictably great results. I strongly urge all of our listeners to check out everything Imperial Yeast has to offer and let them know that you appreciate their support of the Brewlosophy podcast while you're at it. All right, on to the show. According to the results of our general homebrewer survey from 2015, roughly 14% of people endorsed brewing on an electric system, with about 55% saying their energy source was propane. Compare that to the results of our 2019 survey. Just 4 years later, 36% of respondents said they brew with an electric rig compared to just 49% who use propane or natural gas in their garage. Clearly, a shift is happening in the way folks approach making beer at home. You're listening to the Brewlosophy podcast. I'm your host, Marshall Schutt, and joining me to talk about our experiences with electric brewing is contributor Matt Del Fiacco.
Man, that's actually really interesting statistics. I hadn't made that comparison in the homebrewer surveys. That's actually really interesting to hear, and I think it speaks to just the accessibility of electric nowadays. Things have become radically more accessible in terms of just the controller options and the single vessel options and all that good stuff. And honestly, after having switched from propane to electric, I don't know how I could go back at this point. I love my electric system.
Yeah, I actually remember after converting from propane to natural gas, which I wrote an article on. I mean, it was such a huge move for me, thinking that it was the thing that I was going to stick with forever. It just made brewing in my mind so much easier not to have to go refill tanks. At the time, going electric just seemed like such a hassle to me. But as the options began to increase, I guess, my thinking definitely changed on electric. And now, like you said, man, I cannot imagine brewing any other way. I love it. I look forward to digging into our experiences on brewing electric in this episode. But real quick, Matt, we are in unprecedented times right now. How have you been dealing with this quarantine thing?
I have been not great. I've been not super great. I'm one of those people who I can't sit. I can't sit down. I can't relax. I'm very bad at it. So being sort of trapped in the house, I think I'm exhausting my dog by going on so many walks outside and just moving. So I've been all right. I've had a low grade fever for a couple of days. And so there's always the part of you that's is it the Rona? Is it something serious? Yeah. But at the same time, it's I feel okay. So I'm just going to stay inside for the sake of, being safe and trying to be a good member of society.
Yeah.
But man, I'm just antsy. I'm painting rooms. I'm I'm cleaning. The garage is spotless. It's just me going nuts.
I have a feeling my wife has been doing the same. I'm still, a lot of people have heard that I'm a psychologist in my real life. And I've, for some reason, been deemed an essential, employee or whatever. So I'm still going to work like regular. It's a very odd thing, taking every step, of course, to keep my distance from people that I work with and whatnot. But it's hilarious to me. I have a feeling that when we come out of this thing, there's going to be a lot of homes that look a lot better than they did before coronavirus came along. My wife has since painted, I think, 2 rooms. Yesterday, she was looking at a door that she had me. She was working on the door, but of course, I had to go in and do some of the heavier lifting on that bad boy. But she's sitting there staring at it. It's finished. She goes, "Boy, that looks nice." I said, yeah, I think it looks really nice too. And she goes, "I think I'm going to take a break for a day or two on all of the other projects I've got planned." And I said, I think that's probably a good idea. Just so much home renovation stuff going on because there really is nothing anybody else can do. I've been doing my best, like I talked about last week, to go out and pick up crowlers. What an odd experience that's been, walking into these pubs that I'm usually sitting at the bar, for an hour or two on the weekends, and it just being people separated by 6 feet waiting for big cans.
Absolutely, man. But at the same time, good for you for getting out there and for doing that. I know this has hit the brewing industry so hard. And it's just any way that we can support the local places, and especially if someone who's doing beer that you believe in and that you enjoy, I mean, throw a couple bucks their way if you've got it. Obviously, look out for yourself and your family and all that good stuff. But if you can swing it, throwing a little money at your breweries, your local breweries, is going to go a long way.
Absolutely. And the same goes for, again, I mentioned this earlier, but there are, at least in the state of California, you can actually go on certain brewery websites, and they'll ship you beer right now, which is pretty rad. I ordered 4 bottles from the Rare Barrel yesterday. So do what you can. I know that some people are hard up right now. People have been losing their jobs and whatnot.
Yeah.
Do what you can. Obviously, like you said, take care of your families and whatnot. Another big bummer is that I've been hearing of a lot of brewing events and competitions lately that have been canceled because of COVID-19, which is, people really who are planning on going to these things. That's to me, that's just sucks. Like, you had this plan to go do something fun. Now you can't. Well, I wanted to let everybody know that our friends from Mecca Great Estate Malt are still planning to host, I believe it's the first annual Brewing Man event up in Madras, Oregon on August 8th, 2020. We're assuming that we're going to be past this COVID-19 thing by then. They describe Brewing Man as, quote, a celebration of indigenous ingredients, as well as a living and learning environment focused on natural methods of brewing and how to synchronize with your own terroir to create unparalleled fermentations. At this point, I wouldn't be able to go because I've got a family trip planned that week, but now I'm not sure how that's even going to end up. So, but I have a feeling that Brewing Man's going to be a really unique, educational, super fun event. You can learn more about Brewing Man over at brewingman.org. Do something to support the craft malt industry. Mecca Great Estate Malt is a huge supporter of Brewlosophy, good friends of ours as well, and just great people. So I also want to send a humongous cheers, not only to all of the people who have been supporting us via Patreon for some time, but all of the rad people who made their pledge following last week's little mini episode. You all are so awesome. We love doing this thing, and your support really is what allows us to keep doing it. If you enjoy listening to this podcast and the way that we talk about beer and brewing in the way that we do, please consider becoming a patron yourself over at patreon.com/brewlosophy, where in return for a small monthly pledge, you're going to receive a reward like access to unpublished recipes, unique discounts at YakimaValleyHops.com, and an invite to a monthly live Q&A session with somebody in the brewing world. Just a couple days ago, Jay Goodwin from the Rare Barrel and the Sour Hour podcast answered patrons' questions. He was locked down at his parents' house. He had his dad come on, which I thought was pretty cool.
It was awesome. I loved it.
It was a really amazing session. When these brewers and the other guests come on, they're usually pretty open with what they're willing to share. So, coming up in April, I'm really excited for this one. Brewmaster of Portland, Oregon's Wayfinder Beer, Kevin Davey, is going to be doing the same, taking questions for about an hour from patrons. Wayfinder in my opinion, makes some of the best lager beers in the United States. They're right up there with Chuckanut and Freem. If lagers are your thing, you do not want to miss this session. I'm sure Kevin's going to share some really great information. You got to make sure to become a patron by April 24th to get in on this one. All past sessions with guests such as John Palmer, Russian Rivers Vinny Chilurzo, and Grandmaster BJCP Judge Gordon Strong are available on our private Facebook page for patrons to watch whenever you like. Again, you can learn more about becoming a patron over at patreon.com/brewlosophy. And if you wouldn't mind letting us know what you think about this show by leaving a rating and a review in Apple Podcast or wherever it is you listen to podcasts, we'd really appreciate it. I was checking out our reviews recently. I think we're pushing like 650, which is pretty phenomenal. So thanks for leaving those, people. All right, feedback this week is brought to you by Brewers Hardware, who offer brewers gorgeous stainless gear such as the turnkey BH15 pilot brewing system, which has a hard plumb manifold to eliminate all hosing changes during the brew process. Brewers Hardware has a ton of unique purpose-built products useful to both professionals and homebrewers. Go see for yourself at brewershardware.com, and don't forget to mention Brewlosophy at checkout to receive a free gift. Again, that's brewershardware.com. Alex Stegens from Berlin, Germany, had some feedback on our episode about cold crashing speed. I believe that was episode 127. He said, I thought you might find it interesting that among German homebrewers, the common opinion is to cold crash fast, hence the name. If the temperature wasn't literally crashing down, one would run the risk of reducing its effectiveness on the beer's clarity. So for me, it was interesting to learn it's done the other way in the United States. Since I've always done it quickly, it's good to hear that you don't find any data opposing that practice.
Yeah, I mean, that is really interesting to hear, especially just like the regional differences in how people are approaching it. I actually don't, for some reason, I don't quite understand why like cold crashing quickly would be more effective in terms of clarity, other than the fact that it's at a lower temperature for a longer period of time, like, over the course of a couple days. And then a big reason that people tend to cold crash slowly is obviously like you don't want to do too much suck back in terms of oxygen and and just in terms of like the liquid if you're have like a blow off tube or something. But that's really interesting to hear. And yeah, I personally have done it both ways. I've never really noticed any detrimental effect. And I think I pretty much just set it and forget it now. Like I do it really quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. So do I. We talked about that in the episode. It is funny. I mean, the word crash does kind of have a kind of like expeditious component to it, if you will. Like
yes,
it does
there's
seem
like some rhetorical baggage there. That
it seems
a
fast
thing.
Yeah. So I get it. It is interesting to hear that in the region where that's known, in my opinion, for some of the best beers on earth, that are fear of stressing the yeast out over here in the U.S., that they're not worried about it. So cool. I appreciate the feedback, and I'm going to keep cold crashing fast, like I said in that episode. So I understand the presumption, Alex. And again, I appreciate the feedback. So if you have show feedback, you can send it to feedback@brewlosophy.com or drop us a line on social media. All right, I've said it a million times that my preference is handily for beer-flavored beer, but that doesn't mean I don't occasionally enjoy the adjunct-laden pint. And one adulterant that I've sort of come around to lately, at least in darker styles, is coffee. In fact, House of Pendragon had their Supremely Black, which is a delicious coffee, I believe a porter, that I've been crushing on a lot lately. Well, listener Paul Kilgore of homebrewery Wargany Brewing recently sent me a blonde ale that not only was hit with whole coffee beans towards the end of fermentation, but it was fine with Clarity Firm, making it gluten reduced.
1 minute beer review with Jersey and Tim.
Every open door.
Damn, boy.
A little bit of a burnt smell.
Oh, my God.
Oh.
That is burnt smelling.
Oh, man. Now, it's not terrible. It's just interesting.
It's not terrible. Very, very smoky roast.
Ooh, back to smoky roast, huh?
You getting it?
Ooh, dude.
Dude.
Yeah, it tastes like you're eating a roast.
A roast, huh?
Oh, wait, you meant like roast coffee?
Yes.
Delete this whole beer review, dude. We look like complete idiots. I'm like, mashed potatoes and roast.
This is not
We look
pot
like
roast.
idiots. It does have that, like when you're eating burnt steak, that kind of burnt flavor. Come on, give me something. Help me salvage this.
No.
No? Okay.
Ooh.
I don't like it. It's just burnt flavor.
I don't like it either.
Not even a smoky, just burnt flavor. No, it's delicious. I'm sure it's delicious. I don't like it.
It smells exactly like it tastes.
It's just smoky.
You finished it?
Well, I mean, I couldn't get to the bottom of it.
I'm not going to get to the bottom of it. It's a 1 for me.
I give it a 14 jerseys.
For negative.
Negative 62.
As the saying goes, we taste with our eyes first, and I am convinced that the roasty coffee character in this blonde ale hugely influenced the guys' impressions of the beer. I don't think they were expecting that at all. Knowing that it was made with coffee, I actually thought it was pretty decent. Super clean, with an obvious coffee aroma and flavor. Not as good as coffee porter or stout, but certainly nothing glaringly wrong with it. You win some, you lose some, I guess.
Yeah, it definitely like speaks to the like you expect water and drink orange juice reaction. You know,
exactly.
Like it's just like your mental perception of what you're about to taste has been so thrown off. Especially like it's interesting. They like that initial reaction of the aroma being burnt, right? Like that specific terminology. It's really interesting. But yeah, I mean, coffee blondes are really popular, and they're definitely I think something that are hard to do super well. Like I usually get like a green veggie flavor out of it that I don't love. So sounds like a good beer to me.
Yeah, I'll be honest. I'm not a big fan of pale beers that are hit with coffee. Sure. I've yet to have one that I absolutely love. We'll put it that way. I do feel like it's and it could just be a perception thing for me, but I do think coffee tends to work better in darker styles. That being said, a blonde ale, you don't expect a blonde ale to be too rich in the mouthfeel or sweet or anything like that. And so it was almost the experience. I wrote this down was almost like drinking a cup of watered down black coffee. So it didn't have, you drink like a coffee porter or stout, and you kind of get the creaminess from the beer to balance that sharpness of the coffee. That wasn't necessarily there in this beer. And so I could understand why the guys just got roasty and didn't understand where that was coming from. Either way, though, I felt like the beer was well made. Interesting idea at the very least. And I appreciate Paul for sending it in. If you'd like to have your beer or any other fermented beverage reviewed by Jersey and Tim, you can email me, Marshall@brewlosophy.com, and we will get you all set up. When we get back from this short break, Matt and I are going to be talking about our experiences with electric brewing. Chilling work can be a chore, especially after a long brew day, but not with the exGEERience Counterflow Chiller, which can chill a 5-gallon or 19-liter batch of wort in 5 minutes or less, leading to a strong cold break and clear wort in the fermenter. Brewlosophy's Matt Del Fiacco uses the exGEERience Max and absolutely loves it. In addition to improved chilling efficiency, every exGEERience comes with a 5-year warranty that covers the entire chiller for manufacturer defects. If you're looking to up your chilling game and a CFC is right for you, head over to exGEERience.com today. This episode is brought to you by Milwaukee-based Spike Brewing, designer and manufacturer of premium quality homebrewing equipment. Whether you're interested in upgrading to a stainless steel fermenter like the incredible Flex Plus or switching to a turnkey electric setup so you can brew inside and avoid the cold, wet winter, Spike Brewing has the solution for you. Visit spikebrewing.com/brewlosophy today and let their team help you figure out what you need to make the most of your brew day. Again, that's spikebrewing.com/brewlosophy. Spike Brewing. Pursue what's possible. As every brewer knows, the best beer requires the best hops, which Yakima Valley Hops provides fresh from the source to brewers around the world, carrying everything from classics like Cascade to modern favorites like Galaxy and Mosaic, as well as other ingredients and gear. Yakima Valley Hops has it all. And don't forget to check out their new podcast, The Late Edition, where the YVH crew goes into depth on our favorite plant with industry experts. Head over to YakimaValleyHops.com now to see all they have to offer and subscribe to The Late Edition wherever it is you listen to podcasts. Craftmaster Growlers takes traveling with and sharing beer to a new level. Made from heavy-duty stainless steel, Craftmaster Growlers are double-wall insulated and can keep beer cold for up to 8 hours. Unlike typical growlers, Craftmaster Growlers come with a swiveling tap and fully integrated CO2 regulator cap, allowing beer to stay fresh for 2 weeks or more. The square design takes up less space and will fit in most refrigerator doors, and every Craftmaster Growler comes with a 1-year warranty. There are 64 and 128-ounce versions available over at craftmastergrowlers.com. About a year ago, I had my garage outfitted with dual 240-volt circuits and began brewing on an electric rig. Admittedly, it took me some time to jump on board with brewing electric, in part because I'd spent so much time and money installing natural gas lines in my garage and was sort of married to that approach. It was basically constantly hearing from Jake and you, Matt, about how great electric brewing was that finally pushed me over the edge.
Yeah, I mean, and I know we went through those conversations pretty extensively, and I love electric brewing, man. It is the best, especially because it was coming to me, I think I've talked about this before on the podcast, but it was coming to me at a time in my life when I was moving around really frequently, and I didn't, I wasn't in a position to make a natural gas line or even install a 240 volt electric. So I jumped in on a 120 volt system, and it's just so damn simple. Like it's just so easy to do. And in terms of, like propane is totally fine. I've had beer that's incredible that has been made with propane.
Yeah, oh yeah.
And, like there's in terms of quality, propane is absolutely 100% fine. As is natural gas, as is steam, all those other ways that people might do it. It's not steam so much on the homebrewers level. But
I would love to see one though.
God, I know. Wouldn't that be cool? That's going to
Yeah.
be the next wave. As after electric settles down, it's going to be steam based systems. But yeah, definitely like just. Electric is very simple. It can be really accessible, and it's increasingly accessible, like as these new systems are coming out. So just in general, it's really any time you are using, and just so we can like sort of settle on a definition, I guess, whenever the mash and boil are controlled or they are controlled by an electric element, it is electric brewing. So using an electric element just to heat your water, heat to a boil the wort, and then all that heating stuff being done with an electric brewing.
Absolutely.
That just for our purposes, as opposed to like potentially like automated propane system or gas system that are utilizing electric components. Specifically, we're talking about like the use of an electric element.
That's right. Yeah. That you plug into the wall and it heats up and does whatnot. Now, there are, I like that you mentioned this. There's a lot of people out there when I first switched over, the home brewing world knew that I did because I document it and I share it with everyone.
Right.
I got a lot of questions. Well, how is it impacting the flavor of your beer? Now, just to get this out front, we're going to talk some of our personal preferences, our pros and cons of switching over to electric from the other energy sources that we used before. But just to get this out there, I have not experienced it subjectively. Anecdotally, I haven't done the comparison, but I haven't experienced any change in the way the beers taste, smell, mouthfeel, all that stuff.
Yeah.
To me, you're doing the same thing, which is heating up, boiling the wort, holding mash temperatures at temperature, whatnot. So it doesn't. To me, I don't know if I can speak too much to the impact that it has on like beer flavor. And at this point, having not done a formal experiment on it yet, at least, I'm going to go ahead and just kind of run with. I don't think it has much of an impact at all in terms of beer character.
Yeah, I feel the same way. I mean, and especially just in regards to there being considerations that you have to make for whatever brewing system that you're going to use, like, would electric brewing make a difference on like an ultra low watt density element versus a really high watt density element?
Right.
Maybe, I don't know. Like I've never tried it, and it'd actually be an interesting thing to try, but it's just another thing where you have to make considerations for the system. Like, just in general, a common pro of going electric is the regulation of the mash temperature if you're recirculating during the mash.
Yeah.
If you're recirculating during the mash, you're going to lose, obviously, a little bit more temperature typically. And if you're really concerned about staying within a certain window of degrees, an electric element can be used alongside your thermometer probe in a controller to make sure that you are heating appropriately. And it's just like you set that temperature and you walk away, and it's super easy and nice, as opposed to a propane system where I did this for a little bit, where if you recirculate using propane, you have to nurse it a little bit more and be present. Like every 5 minutes, every 10 minutes, you have to check and make sure you're not dropping, and then hit the gas a little bit and then not.
Yeah.
So it's just a little, as far as pros go, that's a big one. It's real easy.
To me, I would sum up what you're talking about as controllability. There's this element of, by control, that kind of encompasses a lot of things. But in terms of, if you're focusing specifically on the mash and the boil, for example, and we can really only speak mostly to the systems that we're using now, and we're going to get into talking about our experiences on different systems a bit later. But Matt, you're using the Unibrow from Brow Supply. I'm using the V1 or the 1V from SS Brewtech. So, that the ability to set a specific mash temperature, and if you want to use pumps, again, I've got my own way of doing things these days, but you can very easily, particularly with these modern controllers, it's amazing, set it to a set temperature and walk away, and it holds it there, especially with a pump recirculating that sweet wort. It'll just hold it there. And you literally set it and forget it and can walk away and come back an hour later, and it's still sitting within I'd say a 2 degree Fahrenheit range for the most part. Same thing with the boil. If you are a big believer and adherent in a rapid boil or a very vigorous boil, you can, for the most part, depending on the system you can have a very vigorous boil. You can have just barely a bubble on the top of your wort, just depending on where you set the power going to the element in the kettle.
Yeah.
So it's really neat, that controllability factor. And I think a lot of people in brewing are have this, I'm not saying we're control freaks, but we kind of are nerds when it comes to having our hands and being involved and wanting to know every little tiny little number and aspect in brewing. And I feel like electric brewing hugely contributes to that for me.
Yeah. Well, especially, it's interesting you bring up the boil, because like obviously if you're someone who's really concerned about boil intensity and all that, then that, like, as far as I'm concerned, actually natural gas and propane are easier ways of doing that regulation of the boil, because it's real easy just to dial something up and down in terms of like how much gas you are feeding this thing.
Sure.
As opposed to electric, where if your controller doesn't have a power regulation state where it's just like that element is on or it's off, you don't have nearly as much control in that regard. Like, you need to account for the fact that you want a controller, something like the Auber Easy Boil, that does actually regulate power to going to the element, as opposed to some of these other systems. Like if some of these Inkbird ones are doing it, for example, it's just like, okay, 1650 watt on or off. And that's it.
Yeah. And that's right. Exactly. And that's good. To be honest with you, the way that I always viewed my natural gas brewing, because I could go, when I was brewing natural gas, I could set it really low. And if I walked away within 20 minutes, I'd have a boiling mash. If I left, it would still achieve a boil. That's how powerful the burners and stuff that I were using were.
Right.
So yeah, it's, to me, that's sort of similar. And to be honest, even with that, even if you just got a simple on off element, you can still brew electric. You just have to, again, like you said, you have to nurse it a little bit more, but man, it's still just as easy to use.
Oh, absolutely. So right now the Unibrews that I'm using are just on off, and you can regulate the boil pretty well by controlling how much of the lid is over the actual kettle itself.
Yeah.
And you can it definitely you get a more intense boil the more you cover it. So it's individual systems and considerations. I mean, another big pro, at least that I've experienced, and I know you did this actually prior also to going full electric, is that you can just ready your mash water, strike water for when you wake up. That's the best. That is the best thing is you wake up and your strike water is heated. You can just let it go all night and it's totally fine. That is a huge game changer in terms of the time invested in a brew day.
Right. Particularly if you have a controller where you can set a specific temperature. I've done another really neat thing for those who are into kettle sours, which I know is a controversial topic these days. I've done a Berliner Weiss that I set my controller to maintain. I inoculated with unmilled grain, threw it in there in a bag, and just left the kettle set to 95 degrees Fahrenheit for 2.5 days. And it was not an issue. And it held it there exactly at 95 degrees Fahrenheit. When the wort was, sour enough, I pulled the grains, I brought it up to a boil, all in the same vessel. So there's a lot of conveniences. To me, my absolute favorite is, and this is a subjective one. We, living in California, went solar a couple years ago. And so I create my house's, the sun, I should say, creates all of the energy that my house uses nowadays. So I'm literally not paying, quote unquote, to brew anymore. I don't have to pay for the natural gas, which was, when I was brewing 3 to 4 times a month, my natural gas bill was bumping up into the $100 to $115 a month. Now we barely see a bump on our energy bill, and I'm brewing with a 240 volt system. So I love that. I mean, the fact that I can just go outside, press a button, and I'm good to go, I think that's sweet.
Yeah, something that I've really enjoyed about having an electric system is just it is so portable and it's so easy to be portable.
Yeah.
Is where if you're running a natural gas system, you're not portable. And even to a degree, if you're running a 240 volt electric system, you're not as portable for sure. You would need to go to a place where you knew that it had that kind of a connection.
Right.
But the 120 volt system I use, I went to the Wingnut Brew Club here in Illinois. I went to their big brew day this year, and I just brought my electric system and made a saison, and I had a blast. So it was just easy. I picked up my kettle, I put it down, and that was literally my entire moving there, where other guys had to unload a couple different burners, unload some propane, do a couple different things here and there. And we all made good beer. We all got the job done. It's just so damn simple to just pick it up and walk away.
Absolutely. And now I would have to say, before we move on to things that I think everyone who's considering going electric needs to consider, probably the biggest con that I hear about from people in terms of this is the overall cost to get into electric brewing. Again, we're going to go over the various approaches to electric brewing in the next segment, but it's not the cheapest conversion if you've been brewing on propane. If you look at it in the immediacy, right in front of you, it doesn't seem like it's a very inexpensive conversion. However, how many times do people who brew propane fill that propane tank every month? Or in my case, it was twice a month because I was brewing so often, but every year, if you want to look at it that way, it starts to add up, and those burners, again, sometimes those burners people are spending, I've seen $200 for a freaking burner that people will buy to brew beer on. You start putting it all together, and then the efficiency of time and the savings that you get. I put a value on my time when I'm looking at things like this. So I don't think it's actually too bad. And like you mentioned earlier, there are so many different systems that are coming out right now.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
That the range in price of what is available is pretty vast at this point. So I do think that it's something that most people, perhaps with a little bit of focus, could probably jump into for a decent price.
Yeah, I agree 100%. It's one of those things in brewing. You can spend $200 or $300 and get into it, or you can spend $4,000 and get into it. And it's up to you and what you want to pursue in this system. It is 100% flexible, and we'll go into that a little bit in terms of these electric brewing options that are out there, and then some of the DIY options that we see people doing.
Absolutely. Okay, so first thing that I feel like almost anybody who's considering going electric, the first thing they're gonna look at is the voltage. How powerful do they want their system to be? When it comes to this, there are some other things you got to talk about as well. But in terms of voltage, you've got your 120 volt systems, which is what you're brewing on, Matt. You got your 240 volt systems. That's what I'm brewing on. Obviously, one's going to be more powerful than the other one. I think in terms of wattage, the 120 volts, around 1650 is about as high as they're going right now.
You know, I've seen some out there that are 2200. I think actually Brew Hardware has one, but I've never used one personally. Mine are about 1650, and that's usually the upper range of what you'll typically see. 1650, 1600 are the common ones for 120 volt systems, as opposed to, of course, systems like yours that a 200 and a 240 volt system is typically going to be looking at like a 5500 watt element. So it's quite a bit more powerful.
It is. I've brewed on a lot of these systems. I will tell you that 240 volts is quite a bit more powerful. Yes. In fact, for your typical 5-gallon batch, if all you're brewing is a standard 5-gallon batch, 5,500 watts on a 240 volt system it's overpowered. I mean, you would boil over all the time, every time, if you use it at full power. Again, the beautiful thing is having the ability to regulate the power that goes to basically the wattage that goes to the element. You don't get boil overs all the time or anything like that. But a couple things to consider now. On 120 volt systems, sometimes depending on the system that you end up going with, they're going to have an option for like a second element. Yeah. And when you do that, you have to consider the electrical loads, so the amperage, right? And for a lot of people, you can't run both of those elements on a 120 volt system on the same circuit, or you're going to pop your breaker.
You'll blow it.
So you need to know exactly, and you need to know where your separate circuits are. It's pretty easy. I think most people who own a home know this. Most apartment buildings have multiple circuits in like you can get away with doing this. But if you buy one of these systems and you go and plug both of your 120 volt whatever size wattage elements you've got into the same circuit, almost guaranteed you're gonna pop your breaker.
Yeah, definitely. You'll more than likely you'll definitely flip it, and I've done it a number of times, just like on the hope that it wouldn't happen, but it does every single time. I don't try anymore. But and that is maybe like one of the cons. So here's a quick pro. I mentioned earlier, like obviously I can pick up my 120 volt system, and I've gone and I brewed at my parents for a day, right? And then I picked up my 120 volt system. I brewed outside a brewery, but the rise times in temperature of 120 volt to 1600 watt element. If you're not plugging in two elements, you're using a single 1600 watt. It takes me like 40 minutes to get from a mash to a mash out to a boil. It takes forever. And as opposed to a 240 volt system, like something, if you're running a higher wattage element, it's a quick jump. It's
very fast.
It's not too far.
Yeah.
So that's maybe a con of it. So there's some portability as a pro. There's con is obviously, just the time that you're spending invested in your brew day, unless you are plugging in both those elements, in which case then your con is you are getting an extension cord to find a separate, separate circuit somewhere, but also you don't need to put in and install a 240 volt circuit. Right. So there's that trade-off.
Yeah, exactly. And that's a really good point. One of the things, the Hop Chronicles brewer, Paul Amico, he lives right next to me here. And he's brewing on the Clawhammer unit, which is a 120 volt system. And, I liked his take. He basically just said, when you know that it's going to take, 45 minutes to strike temperature and then another 40 minutes to get to a boil, then you just embrace and accept it, and it's fine. He's like, right. That's if your entire focus is a quick brew day, then yeah, you might be a little bit bummed out with a 120 volt unit, but if you are okay with that, you're going to be able to make great beer. And I can attest he's making perfectly good beer on a 120 volt unit, as are you, Matt. I've had your beers as well. One real quick thing. People are going to say, well, I'm seeing 110, not 120, or 220, not 240. I'm not an electrician. So I don't know what they're the same thing though. 110 is the same as 120. 220 is the same as 240. I don't know why we refer to them differently.
Yeah. I mean, I think I'm also not an electrician, and just from like a quick cursory glance around, there's two common explanations I see. One is that it's a product of a different time when we had like a different sort of grid system going on. So just like it was obviously lower. The other one that I think, the one that I think makes more sense is like distribution and like utilization of power, where you have a 120 volt circuit, but how much of that power like actually travels across the line to an appliance. So it's, you know, like you'll see an appliance being rated at 110, which is just showing that it can operate at a lower utilization than a full utilization of the 120 volt circuit.
Right.
So it's a little, and I'm sure there's far better and like accurate explanations than that. But as far as we are concerned, when you're like looking at these systems and planning for it, if it says 110 and 120 are synonymous, like they are going to be able to operate on the same sort of space. And then some electrician somewhere, I'm sure, will send me an email, and then I can relay that.
Yeah, whatever.
Because I'm sure they are different. I'm sure they are different, and I'm sure there's reasons why we refer to them differently. And I'm sure there's a history to it. But for the purpose of planning out your system, don't get too caught up in like those kinds of numbers.
Yeah, exactly. View 110 is the same as 120, 220 is the same as 240. Now, the beautiful thing, if you're going with a 120 volt unit, is that you can literally just buy it, bring it home, plug it in, and you're good to go.
Yeah.
Not so much the case with 240 volt units for most people. I had to have a 240 volt circuit installed in my brew space in my garage. The only other ones in my house were for my stove, which is, I'm not going to use that, and then for my dryer. Now, this poses a couple of unique issues. The first one is, what type of outlet are you going to be using? And that's based on the system you get. So I'm brewing on the SS BrewTech 1V. That uses an L630 3-prong outlet. Okay, it's a locking outlet. It's got 3 prongs. Cool, great, works wonderful. That's what I had installed in my garage. Well, I recently got the new Spike electric single vessel system to try out, and that one relies on a 4-prong dryer outlet. I don't have the capacity to just go and install a whole other circuit right now. I mean, that's just not going to happen. So not knowing that, I was kind of up a creek, right? Because I'm sitting there going, well, crap, how do I, is there an adapter? Apparently there's no adapters, and I'm sure there's a very, very smart electrician out there who's come up with something. But I just couldn't use it. Thankfully, again, Paul, who recently had a 3-prong L630 circuit installed in his garage, it was close enough to his box that he was able to have another 4-prong run by his electrician friend. Yeah, so he's going to be able to brew on that, which is fantastic. But you need to consider that before you go and do your install and purchase one of these, especially if it's one of the more high-end kind of expensive units. Now, another thing you have to pay attention to is the electrical current, which is measured in amps. Again, I'm not an electrician, but this is basically a function of the wattage of the element and the voltage of your unit.
Yeah, definitely. And like before, when you were talking about you're not going to run 2 1650 watt elements on the same circuit, part of that is amperage draw. Like how much, you know, like that's just how much amperage do these things draw. And honestly, like a 1650 watt element, 120 volt system, it's about maxing out how much amperage that circuit can handle all on its own with the controller. And you could probably put a pump on there and you'd be okay. But you're about at the extent of what that's going to handle.
I did one of those home build. This was my very first ever electrical, like, you know, I went into electric brewing and I thought I'm just going to make one of these heat sticks that people are making.
Oh yeah.
And I ended up getting a element that was just a bit bigger. I thought, oh yeah, you know, I got a slightly big, I forget exactly, I think it was a 2000 watt element or something like that, bigger. Well, I only had a 15 amp breaker. And so every time I would plug that thing in, it would pop that breaker. And I forget exactly if it was a 10 or a 15 amp. Again, I'm not an electrician, but it was popping it every time. And so I emailed somebody who was making, brewing electric heat sticks and knew this really well and was like, here's my stats. What am I doing wrong here? And they kind of like LOL'd and
it's like
this is why it's not
mistake.
working. But and my house was built in the late 90s. So they were saying that might be it. But the thing is I'm not going to mess around with my electrical panel at all. I'm not comfortable doing that. And if you aren't comfortable doing that, just hire somebody to do it. Include that in the cost of this conversion. But apparently that's not a very difficult thing to swap out or to run a new breaker that has higher amperage. So, but that's something you want to consider, and particularly with 240 volt system. Again, I think what most people are going with are 30 amp breakers, and for a single system that works beautifully. I've talked to one person who's running a 50 amp breaker for two 240 volt systems. Dang. I've got two 240 volt systems, but since I was having the whole new install, I just had my electrician install two separate circuits, so I was safe, and both of them are 30 amp. Now, I think the biggest thing when you're working with liquids in general that you need to consider, and electricity, is making sure that you are staying safe and that you're protected should any of that liquid come into contact with the outlet. And so you're going to spend a little bit of extra money on a GFCI breaker. And I can't recommend that enough. When you're working with liquids, you don't want to shock yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. Like definitely is like GFCI outlets for everything. They also, if you're leaning into that portability stuff I mentioned, or you're getting one of these other, like, you know, like the coffee urn style systems, like the mash and boil or the RoboBrew or something, they sell portable GFCI outlets that you can just plug into other outlets. Just spend the $16. Be safe about it. Additionally, just in terms of general safety, Marshall, like you said a little bit earlier, if you are someone who is comfortable DIYing your electric, more power to you. I am not one of those people. And so if you have any doubts, don't do it, because it's so dangerous. Like if just be as safe as possible, please. Like know what you're doing if you're going to mess with that stuff.
I couldn't agree more. And when this is one of those things that it's kind of a shocking difference in price. A GFCI, a 30 amp GFCI breaker costs about $90. A 30 amp breaker that's not GFCI is like $12. So I remember when I was doing my shopping, I did a lot of it on Amazon. I'm looking at going, there's no way the difference is that much, but it is. And you just got to swallow it and know that you're protected should anything go wrong. And I know that there are some workarounds. I've read about people doing certain things or kind of going outside of code or what's recommended. I don't know. I'm not comfortable with it. I like my house and don't want it to burn down, particularly when my family is in it. So, but do what you can to be safe if you are going to go this route. Another thing, and this goes for whether you're using 120 volt or 240 volt, if you can brew with with your outlet either higher than your system or kind of away from it, I think that again just kind of add an element of safety, stuff that I'd like to think about again, because I'm brewing in a garage where my family is 2 doors away. So
yeah, absolutely. And I'm 100% with you on that. Definitely just take the precautions that you need to take.
Absolutely. Well, we've got to give some love to our incredible sponsors at this point. But when we come back, Matt and I are going to be talking about our experiences using various electric setups. I think we've both got experience on a couple different types, so we're going to talk about that right when we're back from this break. The brew in a bag method has blown up over the last few years, and in that time, it's become very clear that not all bags are created equal. For the best BIAB experience, you have got to go with the Brew Bag. Made from high-quality, food-safe polyester, the Brew Bag is available in both 210 micron for standard brew in a bag, as well as 400 micron, which works beautifully for all-in-one recirculating systems. I've been a Brew Bag user for years and wouldn't brew without it. Head over to brewinabag.com to get the fabric filter that works for you and use promo code TBP17 at checkout to receive a discount. Again, that's brewinabag.com.
Just as the Grainfather all-in-one brewing system revolutionized all-grain brewing at home, the Grainfather conical fermenter and glycol chiller take this one step further by giving homebrewers state-of-the-art temperature-controlled fermentation, just like commercial breweries use. With a full array of features including insulated double-walled construction, an innovative dual-valve yeast dump and sampling tap, and an integrated heating element and temperature controller, the conical fermenter provides a professional quality fermenting environment for superior temperature control. With the ability to individually power and control the temperature of up to 4 Grainfather conical fermenters, each with their own fermenting schedule, the Grainfather Glycol Chiller is the perfect addition to ensure superior fermenting results. And for a limited time, you can save 10% on your order by going to grainfather.com and entering coupon code NZB during checkout. Once again, enter coupon code NZB when you order the Grainfather conical fermenter or glycol chiller at grainfather.com. Once again, that's grainfather.com.
After a long brew day, the last thing I want to do is waste more time chilling wort. I've tried so many different options, and ultimately I settled on the super efficient immersion chillers made by Jaded Brewing. With the King Cobra and Hydra, I'm able to chill my entire batch of wort from boiling to just a few degrees above groundwater temperature in as little as 6 minutes. If an immersion chiller is right for your brewery, then do yourself a favor and check out all of the rad options Jaded Brewing has to offer at jadedbrewing.com, and be sure to let them know Brewlosophy sent you. Family-owned Atlantic Brew Supply is the largest homebrew shop in the Southeast. No gimmicks, no multinational corporate overlords, and no BS. They offer exclusive malts, yeast, and more from local artisans, as well as award-winning recipe kits. They also sell professional brewing gear and cask equipment from sister companies ABS Commercial and Cask Supply. Most ingredients are available by the ounce, plus Atlantic Brew Supply has an on-site calculator to help you craft your best brew. Orders are processed same day, and 2-day shipping is guaranteed for East Coast customers. Get 15% off your first order using promo code BREWPOD. That's BRUPOD at AtlanticBrewSupply.com. Despite being a fairly recent convert to electric brewing, I've had the opportunity to use quite a few setups over the last couple of years. What's awesome these days is just how many options are available to homebrewers. In fact, I've heard from somebody at one brewing equipment company who referred to the electric brewing as being like the next wave of homebrewing, which I couldn't agree with more. I mean, again, you refer to those stats that I talked about at the top of the show. The bump in people who are now plugging in their, to brew as opposed to turning on or lighting the flame under their kettle that's just amazing to me. And it's not going to stop anytime soon. I know, one of the upsides to all of this coronavirus stuff is that in times like these, home brewing tends to become a little bit more popular, which is kind of interesting. But I have a feeling that given the times in which we're brewing, we're going to see a huge bump in people plugging their systems in as opposed to, again, lighting that flame under their kettle.
Yeah, potentially. I mean, and I think, like we mentioned up top at the beginning of the episode, like one of the reasons that electric brewing is seeing such a spike is that it wasn't that long ago that intro to electric systems meant either a DIY, potentially expensive solution, or a definite expensive solution, something upwards of $800, $900, just in terms of your initial investment in getting the base system. But rapidly, we are seeing more and more products enter the marketplace that are, somewhere in the ballpark of $250 to $300. And that's a much easier pill to swallow.
Yeah, absolutely. That being said, I think a lot of people will look at this, particularly those who have been using propane or natural gas, or even their stove in their kitchen, and may say, well, let me DIY some stuff together first and sort of start slowly converting over to electric from where I'm at now. And the DIY thing is cool. I mean, I'll be honest, if it weren't for my little adventures in DIY electric brewing, I don't know if I'd be where I'm at today in my love for full-blown electric brewery. Like I mentioned earlier, the first thing I did was I built a heat stick. That didn't work. I ended up giving it to somebody who had a newer home and could handle the heat stick. And just as an aside, they're still using this heat stick that I made. So it did work, which is kind of cool. Yeah. I then ended up buying the hot rod heat stick from brewhardware.com. And that one was actually made properly. So that one worked. The cool thing about that is all I wanted it for at the time, I was still brewing on natural gas. All I wanted this 1500 watt heat stick for was to preheat my strike water. So I was able to rig up using one of those smart plugs, set it on a timer so that it would turn on, 2 hours before I was coming out to brew, and I'd wake up to perfectly heated strike water, which to me was like this mind-blowing experience that I didn't have to go and preheat my strike water.
Yeah, definitely. Being able to and those hot rods are not too pricey.
No.
And they work super well, especially if all you want, again, you just want to preheat your sparge water or just preheat your strike water or sparge water. I guess you could definitely use it to heat your sparge water if you wanted while you were mashing. It is such a great option for people, especially for people who don't want to do any sort of manipulation to their kettle, right? If you don't want to either you don't want to drill holes yourself, or you can't do any of the weldless options in terms of, you still need to drill holes, but any weldless options for different clamps or for different threaded ports that you would need for typical electric brewing, the hot rod's a great option because you just set it in the kettle and you're good to go. You're ready to go.
Fantastic. Yeah, and I actually, once I went full-blown electric, Paul had yet to do that, so I gave him the hot rod. He used it for the same purposes that I did. And I refer to this as sort of like hybrid electric brewing, where you're doing some stuff electric and then others, you're still boiling over fire and all. So he used it for the same reasons and loved it. He's since, and I think, again, it kind of plants this seed where you're like, boy, this electric thing's kind of rad. I think I'm going to go all the way in. Which is essentially what Jake Houlihan, Brewlosophy's Jake Houlihan, ended up doing with his. I would kind of refer to his current setup as it was this evolving electric system, this idea, a project, if you will, that is now full blown electric. And he again went from, I believe he was working with propane, but he had a spike kettle, a big 20-gallon spike, your standard V3 spike kettle that he punched a hole in, had an element installed, and then he worked with the electric brewery, I believe it was, to on his panel and got a panel that runs 2 separate units so he can brew experiments and whatnot. Now that was the old school way of going electric before there were all of these all-in-one systems available.
Yeah, I believe so. I think like Jake's system journey has been really interesting to me to follow over the course. I believe I think he actually had Spike. Spike ended up being the people to retrofit that kettle. Like he sent it back to them and they ended up putting on the tri-clamp weld for him. And then, I think he worked with Electric Brewery for that. And I know like Colorado Brewing Systems will do the same thing. Like they'll custom install a tri-clamp port anywhere you want, which is super nice. And I think Spike will do the same thing if you order it from them. But then I think he started out doing single vessel. Like I think he started out like both of those kettles were single vessel systems. And then he eventually went to a 2-vessel system that he still uses. I think he uses the SS Brewtech mash tuns.
Yeah, the infusions.
Yes, yep. He uses the infusions. That's it. And then he still uses the kettles for obviously the electric element for heating the water and for boiling. So he's evolved a really, really interesting system over time. But those DIY options are very, very like you don't even need to work with Electric Brewing or eBrew Supply to do the panel, though their panels are really excellent, and I've seen a couple of them that look really, really beautiful. But you can grab a 120 volt or 240 volt controller for a couple $100 from one of these other places, install your own tri-clamp, either weldless tri-clamp, or if you weld, or if you want to have another place install the weld for you, put it on your kettle, and you're pretty much good to go. Like
Absolutely.
It's really, the DIY is not a bad option, especially if you already have some stuff, or if you have like specific needs for it. DIY is a good path.
Yeah, I do have some tips. I made a couple kegels back in the old days when kegels were a thing. I don't see many people using them anymore. But I made a couple of kegels out of legally acquired kegs, so don't hate. And I went with the whole the tapered hole bit. Don't do that. If you want a really clean install, I couldn't recommend getting a stainless punch in the right size and do that. You're going to get a much cleaner hole. I've watched people make big mistakes trying to drill out the holes in their kettles and their stainless. The hole punches are you can't mess up unless you really, really try.
Also, make sure you file that.
Yes. Of course.
Don't just go in raw. File that thing down a bit. Yeah.
And again, if you know a TIG welder, be their friend, offer them a lot of beer. Perhaps they'll install something with a clean a sanitary weld for you as well. But again, I'm in the camp of if I'm not an expert at it, which I very rarely am, I'm just going to let somebody else do it and support their industry. So that's the way I look at it. You can have someone else weld it on for you. It doesn't take very long. But yeah, so DIYing, piecemealing together an electric system is not impossible. In fact, it's the way I think most people did it up until a few years ago. And it works really well. Again, these hybrid rigs, if you're just looking for a way to preheat strike water or to heat your sparge water, you could pick up a 120 volt, 1500 watt element hot rod heat stick or something like that. Make your own. There are instructions all over the internet for how to do that, and just use it for those purposes. It works really well. The beauty of all of electric, in my opinion, you were talking about Jake's kind of evolution of his brewing, is just how modular they are. Just because you go electric doesn't mean you don't have options for the various types of brewing methods. Jake was doing brew in a bag for a while. He thought it was okay, but he still preferred, subjectively, the batch sparge method, and that's what he's doing again now. Or I believe he does no sparge, but without the bag. That's just his preference. Yeah, and if you want to use a separate mash tun, I don't do that anymore. I'm doing all 100% brew in a bag with my electric system, and I love that. It's it's making some of the best beer I've made, and I just like that process. It's easier, it's simpler, really easy cleanup. So this does not take away any of your options or the modularity or anything like that. So now, when we get into more of the all-in-one type of systems, I think you can't talk about electric brewing without talking about some of the countertop systems, most specifically the Pico Brew stuff that you literally plug in, set on your counter. It's like the Keurig of beer brewing, right?
Yeah, I think I've seen some advertisements that do specifically refer to it in that way. But like definitely the Pico Brew, which utilizes, I think the Keurig thing comes more so because like there are packs that you can get that have like the grains in it and everything, sure, like the ingredient packs. But these countertop brewing systems like the Pico Brew, I've actually seen a brewery, Nancy out at What's Brewing Homebrew Supply in Palatine. She has a brewery on site, which is sort of similar, except it's an all grain system that it doesn't have those packs in it. I think that thing is like $1,500 or $1,600. It's pretty pricey as far as those go. Which these ones that were coming out, these countertop systems, all did tend to be pretty high price point. As far as electric systems went prior to this, I mean, there was definitely, because obviously a lot of professional breweries use electric brewing systems. And we talked before, like steam jacketing is another option, but a lot of them use electricity. And so you can still find, like, if you want to go, like, I know High Gravity Brewing has like the Warthog, which is a big electric system. I know that Brew Hardware has their own like full electric system for like 15-gallon setup. You can get a 3-vessel system still, but what really started to make these out of niche, like professional homebrewers, so to speak, and go and dive into like more accessibility was definitely like the Pico Brew, the Brewery, these countertop systems. And I mean, I think they're really cool machines. Like they're really, really interesting. They still were hitting sort of a premium price point, but they offered, where these 3-vessel systems still offered like a pretty traditional brew process, these countertops started to introduce like accessibility and ease of use as part of their selling point alongside,
Absolutely.
So that it started to sort of change the conversation a little bit about what electric brewing was for. Like it was no longer for this replication of a professional system. It started to be more about accessibility.
Making the brewing process much more approachable for those who
also
maybe
consistency.
But particularly in my opinion, it seemed like it was for those people who didn't have the time or really maybe want to invest the time and energy in, grabbing a grain mill and storing bulk. You could literally just buy this countertop thing, make a 2-gallon, 2.5-gallon batch of beer, throw it in the fridge, and you were set, and you were making cool beer. It's neat. It's a neat system. I've brewed on a Pico Brew. The Zymatic, I believe, is their 2.5-gallon standard setup. That's what I've brewed on. I've yet to use one of those Pico C's. My experience has been, I've had about 4 or 5 beers off of the Zymatic, and my experience hasn't been terribly positive. And I'm not sure what that is. I know that Greg Foster, who used to work with Brewlosophy a bit in the past, he didn't have a terribly positive experience. But that being said, I've heard from people who absolutely love it. So, when it comes to this kind of stuff, it's difficult to go like test it out in the store type of thing. Maybe find someone online. If you're interested in one of these countertop breweries, find someone online who's been brewing with one for a while, engage in a conversation with them, and maybe ask them to send you a bottle of their beer or something so you can see, what they're doing on it. I've heard positive reviews. Again, I wouldn't say that it's my favorite way to brew. I kind of like digging my fingers in a little bit deeper in the process personally. And the beers just have been different, but I'm sure you could adapt and make something out of it.
Of course.
Now moving on from those countertop systems, which again, I'm not seeing many people brew on those as much as they are other systems. Perhaps Right now, it seems to me one of the growing, more affordable styles of electric brewing are what I refer to as like urn style systems. And
Right.
these are like those, when you'd go to a funeral or something back in the day, there'd be like a coffee urn. They look just like that. And I think it's kind of based off of that model. So you can't talk about an urn style system without talking about the grandfather of urn style systems, Grainfather, which I have had the opportunity to brew on quite a few times. In fact, my first time was in New Zealand. They're everywhere over there, naturally. And it's an awesome system. The engineers behind this unit had in mind more of a traditional sparge-based brewing method. And so that's what it does. It relies on pumps and a little bit of elbow grease to get those grains out. And then you have to have your own kind of side thing of warm water to sparge with. But yeah, I've had some absolutely fantastic beers brewed on a Grainfather unit.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the Grainfather is probably, I think you're absolutely right. Like it was sort of the one that kicked off a lot of it. And since then, in terms of like the Grainfather was still a bit pricey. And I say that like relatively speaking to introduction to propane via coolers and all that stuff.
Yeah.
And so it was definitely something that, like, I think an experienced home brewer would typically be like, okay, I'm interested in this electric brewing system, especially if you want to brew inside. Huge pro for electric is if you can deal with the steam, you can brew inside.
Absolutely.
And it's great. And so we started to see this rise in other systems like the Brewzilla, the Mash and Boil, the Robo Brew, the Anvil Foundry. All of them have this similar premise of the urn style system, right? And I think actually, interestingly enough, I think Williams Brewing sells a like sparge water heater that is basically a coffee. It is a coffee urn that you would use to like heat coffee, basically.
The Grainfather folks sell one as well. Yeah,
there you go. Exactly. It's just sparge water heater, so you can still sparge and do that, and it works just fine. But these single vessel accessible systems, I'm seeing more and more and more, and they look like a blast. They look really easy. Like every now and then the thought crosses my mind of like, I could brew on one of those, but then obviously I remember that I have pretty much the exact same thing, but larger kettle. So there's no reason for me to drop the money.
Right. The beautiful thing about these urn style systems is that they are 120 volt for the most part. Some of them are offering the 240 volt option nowadays, but they are 120. So like you said, if you've got a plug in your house and you got some way to manage, if you got a deck or a garage or some other way to manage the steam, you can get on one of these things and start brewing right quick, and it works really well. Now, I will say I have messed around with multiple versions, the ones that you listed of these urn style systems. There's a reason. I'm not an advocate for any one over the other, but when you look at the Grainfather unit, you've got options that some of the other ones don't necessarily offer. Are they necessary? Absolutely not. But things like being able to control the basically the entire brew from your telephone, from your smartphone.
Super cool.
You can do all of that. Grainfather Connect is a really, really neat app. And then they offer their own community for users of the Grainfather, all of that. Options such as the Brewzilla, which our newest contributor, Andy Carter, will be brewing on shortly, are very highly spoken of as well. They don't have as many neat little options on the side, but you're going to get away with basically the same thing. And as you start to get into the lower priced versions, again, it's just less options. I believe there's a mash and boil unit that you can get for around $300. No pumps, nothing like that. But if you're just doing straightforward, simple brew in a bag type brewing, I mean, it's going to get you there, for a relatively affordable price. So I like these urn style systems. The other thing you got to consider as well is if you're buying the Grainfather, you're not really doing brew in a bag. It comes with a basket. You lift the basket out. You got to sparge those grains to get to your pre-boil volume, and then you proceed with your boil as usual. So there are different things. Whereas with other ones, you are doing more of a brew in a basket / brew in a bag type of thing. So make sure you do your studying well, and once you've determined how you want to approach brewing, let that influence the decision you make if you're going for one of these types of systems.
Definitely. And as you're thinking about that, like I will say one con, like as we're talking about the things like the Pico Brew or like the Brewy and things like the urn styles, I am always really nervous about systems that rely on proprietary parts or are not like super easy to switch stuff in and out and like use yourself. So as you're thinking about that, like just something to consider as you're like thinking about either DIY or some of these other systems we'll talk about in a moment. there is always the potential. You just have to hope. And I know a lot of these companies, especially Grainfather, has been really exceptional about like making sure that systems are getting repaired and getting settled. They've been really, really great. It's something else to consider, but like seeing these companies work with it for almost the most part, I've seen them handle it with world-class service on it. So something to consider. It could be a bump in the road, but if you're real nervous, I've seen them stand by their product.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. So now, to get to what I would say that you and I know best, Matt, the what I would refer to as the BIAB, that B, last B could be bag or basket systems, right. The all-in-one, the single vessels, however you want to refer to it. These are what you and I are using, and I feel like they are growing in popularity. Right off the bat, you're going to spend a little bit more cash on one of these units because they are all in one, and which means that typically you're receiving a controller that is set specifically for that brewing system with the entire unit. I've seen prices range anywhere from about $700, $800 up to $1,500 depending on the size of system that you want to go with. Yeah. Average price probably around the $1,000 mark, which again, this is everything you need to make beer. So when you really calculate that piece of it into it, and you're considering the fact that you're not running to the store to get propane anymore, if you're really into brewing, I don't think you're going to regret going with one of these systems. Now, Matt, you've been brewing on the Brow Supply Unibrow for a couple years now, and you've gone through actually a couple versions of their systems. Tell us a little bit about your experience just using that system.
Yeah, definitely. So I've gone through 2 iterations of Brow Supply's Unibrew, which is the first was leveraging more of what I would call a brew in a bag system, but the bag was a mesh basket, right? Like it was just, but what I mean by that is total mesh all the way around. It was total, like the sides, the bottom, all mesh screen, all stainless steel screen that would have legs that would lift it off of the elements and then recirculate via a couple different attachments. So that system, it worked really, really well. I liked it a lot. I brewed some of my favorite beers I've ever made were on that system. Especially like once you account for some of the other things, like just making sure. My experience with brew in a bag in general has been that my wort is usually a little cloudier than like a 2-vessel system. In one way I've dealt with that is just by allowing like more rest time before pumping into the fermenter. Like not having so much of a rigorous boil at the end that's going to throw all of the sediment and just protein all around, especially in just like the hop break material. So I loved that system. The only thing I didn't like about it was that I have kind of this running theory of like that we underestimate how effective the grain bed is as a filter for different things, just for particles, for different content, and for other things in the wort. And so I was talking to actually Steven about it at HomebrewCon a couple years ago, and he was like really excited by the fact that I was bringing this up because he was actually in the middle of transitioning to the V3 system, which utilizes a large stainless steel basket. That the bottom is the only thing that is open, so wort has to travel through the grain bed in order to escape. And it's kind of similar, actually. I think the Grainfather is the same way, that its basket is closed on the sides and only open at the bottom.
Sure.
Honestly, I couldn't really tell a difference in the quality of beer between those two things. Like even given my initial assumptions, both the beer was still great quality. I really love the Brow Supply system, and Steven's been really great to work with. It's been going really, really well for me. I really enjoy it. I wrote obviously an article on it for the site, so you can see some of the things I like. I have a couple like dislikes about it, but again, that's just, these are now considerations I have to make that ideally I otherwise wouldn't. But the product is fantastic.
Yeah. It's really pretty too. I think it's well designed. It's got
for whatever that's worth, I guess. It's also very pretty. Marshall, thank you.
Hey, well, listen though, nothing is perfect. I mean, we are as humans, we will find things that we don't like about even the closest to perfect things that we're using. Just over a year ago, I started using the SS Brewtech 1V brewing system. This is the most baseline 240 volt kind of high, most modular system that they offer. When I was talking to the folks from SS about using this unit, their thing was like, listen, it's brew in a bag based. we are hooking you up with basically what you get is the controller, you get the kettle, you get the halo element, which is really unique to SS BrewTech. It's a circular element, 5,500 watts, that heats everything up. And that's it. You provide your own bag and you basically brew in a bag. There's not much different about it. That's exactly what I was looking for anyways at the time. And so I've been using that. My experience on 240 volt, I mean, again, you can go to the website and find all the actual numbers, but I can go out and fill that kettle with water, turn it on full blast, 100% power, and I'm at strike temperature within, 10, 15 minutes. Then I flip it over to the automatic setting and I can set it to hold a specific mash temperature for however long I want. I find I don't actually end up using that option very often, but I'm brewing mostly kind of short and shoddy nowadays. And so the temp drop isn't that big, and I don't feel like recirculating with a pump because cleaning pumps isn't very fun for me. And so what I do is I just, if I mash in at 153, I accept that if by the end of a 30-minute mash, it's at 151, that's fine with me. I don't care about that. And so that's what I've been doing. And then I'll pull that bag out just like you would any other brew in a bag. And as soon as it's out and I collect my pre-volume of wort, I hit the 100% again, set the controller to what's called manual on this controller, which you regulate the percentage of power as opposed to setting a specific temperature. And I'm up to a boil again with another 10, 15 minutes. And then typically what I do with the 1V is I set it to about 70% power and just let it boil for however long I'm boiling, which these days is about 30 minutes usually. And I mean, it is like wham, bam, done brewing. What am I moving on to next? 240 volt has been a game changer for me, particularly with how busy I've been staying lately. 3 kids, regular career job, brewlosophy. I'm telling you, I absolutely love it. Now, they also offer, or are going to be offering soon, what they're calling a single vessel brewing system that I believe is going to come with some form of a stainless basket. Like you've seen out there, I don't think that they've released this just yet. But that unit's going to have more of a full brewing, like here's how you do everything to brew on this unit. Sort of like the Unibrow and some other stuff that we've seen as well. But in my experience, the SS BrewTech 1V, and they offer a 3-vessel version if you're into that, and you don't want to do the brew in a bag thing, but that whole unit and their controller setup is just so easy to use, and I've been really pleased with it myself.
Yeah, and the Spike brewing system is similar. I think they have a stainless steel basket. I believe the claw hammer uses the screen, like the metal screen. Yeah. Is that accurate? Okay. Yeah. I mean, and basically at the end of the day, like just if it's not clear, these are systems where you will heat your water heat your water within the system, lower the basket or bag into the water to temperature. You might set to recirculate, you might not. And then obviously once your mash is finished, raise that basket out of the system. It's basically brew in a bag, how you would normally do it, just in a kettle, electric. Yep. And it's one of those things. I see a lot of DIY systems leaning in this direction, leaning into single vessel.
Absolutely. The final one that we have experience with and that I've actually brewed on as well, like you mentioned, is Clawhammer, who are offering both a 240 and a 120 volt version. Phil Rusher is currently using the 240 volt versions. He's going to be pushing out a review on that relatively soon. And then locally here, Paul is brewing the Hop Chronicles beers on the 120 volt version. Most of the time, I should say. He's been borrowing my SS BrewTech every once in a while as well. Paul absolutely loves it. I've had the opportunity with my friend Jersey, in fact, to brew a couple of beers on the 120 volt Clawhammer, and it is a really well designed piece of gear. The interesting thing about the Clawhammer one, I think, as compared to some other electric brewing systems, is that it is set up for a kind of a hybrid quasi sparge. So when you're recirculating, you actually plug your hose into the top of the lid, and it kind of like sparges over the grains there while it's recirculating. But yeah, great efficiencies, good beers getting turned out on these units. People have asked a lot, what of all of the ones that you've experienced and played on, which one do you think is your favorite? I can't answer that. And I'm not just trying to be equivocal here. It really does depend on what your aim is and what approach you want to brew with the most. If you're into brew in a bag and you only have 120 volt, that's going to guide you one way. If you prefer, a dual vessel system where you're mashing separately than you're boiling, using different units, and you have a 240 volt system, that's going to guide your decision making. I think it's up to everyone to really sit and dig into what it is they really want before they make a decision on what unit to go with. I don't know.
Yeah. I definitely agree. And actually, like on that note, maybe this is a good time to throw in a certain other consideration for if you're exploring some of these systems and going electric. The Brow Supply units are 10-gallon kettles. So that means if I'm brewing a 5-gallon batch, I am typically I'm going to probably, and this is just based on my own experiences, I'm going to probably top out around 1070 as my initial gravity that I can mash in that system in a standard mash practice. Now, I've gotten higher. Obviously, if you read my last article that we did for the aeration article on the Imperial Stout, I did a reiterated mash for that one. So I mashed 2 sets of grains in the same wort to get higher. It's just another one of those considerations you have to make as you're going through it. But definitely think about your goals in terms of the beers you'd like to brew. If you brew an Imperial Stout, or if you're if you're Marshall and you brew a high gravity beer once every year or so, then one of these smaller systems or one of these 10 gallons, totally fine. Yeah. If you're brewing large beers that don't utilize a sugar addition more often than not, explore some of the larger systems. Definitely take a look at some of the 15-gallon systems so that you can it's quality of life adjustments.
Yeah, except that you're going to be brewing 4-gallon batches instead of 5-gallon batches or whatever it is.
Definitely. Absolutely.
Now, another thing is all of these companies that are making these right now have awesome customer service. I've yet to encounter one that I'm like, God, man, the customer service sucks. You can always just shoot them an email and be like, hey, if you have a 15-gallon kettle option, can we do that instead? Or what's the price difference? Most of them are willing to work with brewers like that. So I think it's awesome. Now, we discussed a little bit of our experiences using what we have used. There are obviously a lot of other options out there, and I'm sure that, the generals of what we talked about apply to those as well. Again, if you're doing your research, I think ultimately, and you end up settling on something that is exactly what it is you're looking for, I think you're going to be happy if you go electric brewing. I know for a fact that I have. Matt, that does bring us to the end of this episode. Any last words before we head out?
If anyone has questions or wants specific thoughts, feel free to reach out to me, and I'm happy to talk about this more. I get quite a few emails just about electric brewing in general, so I'm always happy to talk about it more. But I really think that we're going to see more and more brewers transitioning into electric, just as they become more accessible, especially, at least in Illinois, it gets cold, man. People definitely are, it's so nice to be able to brew inside if you want to, and if your wife is amazing or your significant other just in general is amazing and lets you brew inside, then that's always a huge plus as well. Anyone's significant other. So I think we're going to see a rise more. I'll be interested to see what next year's or 5 years down the line, what the homebrewer survey looks like, because I think that shift isn't done yet.
Oh, couldn't agree more. And if you do have questions, like Matt said, you can email any of us directly by using our first name at brewlosophy.com, or you can send feedback to feedback@brewlosophy.com. We'll be sure to respond promptly. If you'd like to learn more about some of the systems that we discussed in this episode, we've reviewed most of them. You can just go search for their names over at brewlosophy.com. The Brewlosophy podcast is made possible by the generous support of our sponsors, as well as all of our rad listeners. We seriously could not do this without you. Cheers to everyone who has subscribed and left a review of our show. It makes a huge difference. If you haven't yet, please consider doing so. Head over to brewlosophy.com/support to view a list of ways you can easily help us to continue producing this podcast. If you want a reward for your support, visit patreon.com/brewlosophy. Thanks again for listening. We'll be back next week with another episode of the Brewlosophy podcast. Until then, think beer.
Start off the morning with some hot tea, lemon and honey, cause it suits my bro. Put some herb in the bowl, yeah, it's homegrown. Ain't gotta go through the middleman no more.